There we go, Paul.
Okay.
We're back.
Yes, sir.
And we're back.
I am so excited because
I'm not excited at all. I'm not because I'm dead inside. We were saying that earlier.
well, look.
No.
I mean, I think excitement is overrated. I am
is.
excited because you said that we're going to talk about shit that went sideways and
Yes.
led us to other things.
My today for these 2 episodes, this is episode 3. We're going to talk about turning points and detours.
Okay.
And like basically like things that were turning points along the way with our thing, whether it be studio or a song or anything we recorded, and anything that kind of sent things sideways, so to speak.
Yeah, our side hustles.
Yeah.
And you and I actually have had like a few side hustles.
We have.
And they've been based out of stupidity and love for the things we like to do.
They have been, yes. Ill-advised, some.
Yes, ill-advised. I mean, you just wouldn't base your like life and your family and everything on the things that we do. Strongly,
It's been
a thing.
all right. Anyhow,
No.
Well, last time we were talking about like this place here and like I was interning here. Then you came in and interned here, and then I ended up getting a job here, and that was like my first big, my first big music business job. And you were here for a while, and then you went to the city, right? You were working in the city,
The old Manhattan.
That was phone programs. Is that right? Is that right?
Yeah, I met my wife, and she had worked for this place in Manhattan, and they needed an audio like recorder guy, an editor guy, and so I actually got a job, and I moved away.
Yeah, and you were like doing kind of like hold messages.
Yeah,
for like
for porn.
Was it for porn?
Well, technically, phone programs stored monthly porn stories.
Really?
Because it was all dial-it.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was like news, weather, speaking of sex, which my wife wrote episodes for.
Really?
Yeah, and then
See, now I'm learning something here. I'm learning something this
and then I would do the voiceovers. They
for the
started getting
sex episodes.
Well, yes, we did.
We'll be right back. This is brought to you by
We'll be right
Ben
back.
Gay.
But that could have worked.
It's like
Because
soreness in the joints.
I don't know for the joints. You mean?
No, I'm not.
What are you talking?
But anyway, I just remember you were doing those things, and there was like LL Cool J was doing these little on hold things, right?
Yes, we did. LL came in. Jeff and Will Smith came in.
Right.
Jesse Jeff. Ozzy came in. Kiss came in. Kid and Play.
Was Ozzy in personally?
Yes, Ozzy was in person.
Really?
Yes.
You met Ozzy?
Met Ozzy.
I did not. I've never met Ozzy.
I didn't want to. I thought that was the end of Ozzy. It wasn't.
No.
I mean,
when I was a kid, I remember like in the 80s, like then it was like, and I loved it. I loved it, like kind of Blizzard of Oz and like Flying High Again and all that kind of all that music. I mean, Crazy Train obviously, but it was like I thought and then it was like they's biting the head off the bat and all that kind of stuff, and that's going on in the 80s. And I thought it was all great. I loved it, but it was I never thought that however many years ago that was. 40 years ago that we'd be still talking about.
We would be talking about Ozzy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not even over. I mean, it's close to being over.
Yeah, and I played last weekend, and I closed my set with the Changes, the Sabbath song. Yeah.
Oh wow.
And just kind of it's like so it's a super cool story. Great band.
Really, really great. I mean, actually, like we're, and I know this is getting a little off topic, but like
we haven't even touched the topic.
We haven't even started the topic.
Okay, yeah.
But that Black Sabbath thing, and everyone in our camp of people that like music and rock music agree that Black Sabbath still is like kind of the core of that feel, and it was just they're kind of like the deviled Beatles,
Yeah.
That's not even right.
Well, and it was
they were like the Beatles from
here's
hell.
Here's the thing, like the sort of necessity is the mother of invention.
Yes.
So it was like Tony Iommi, right? That had was missing
missing his fingertips.
Was missing the tips of his fingers. So basically, like Sabbath was like tuning their guitars down because he couldn't.
Right.
He couldn't fret.
Right.
So basically he I don't know if
he invented the drop tuning.
They've invented
heavy drop tuning.
Yeah, so it was like this darker, heavier sound because he physically couldn't, You know what I mean? So it's like it was born out of that.
So
not
yes.
You know, then eventually they tuned down to ridiculous,
and then everybody
subsonic,
just plays in C# now.
Yeah, right.
Hashtags.
But that was kind of like the origin of.
Yeah.
I mean, not open tuning, not drop D. That would have been more of a blues
Right on.
origin. But like drop tuning your guitar down lower than it was supposed to be tuned would have probably been credited to Sabbath, and was just like it was a practical thing. It was like
a practical thing, and like that's
for
kind
the,
of
the
all
tension on the strings.
Yep, it's all the best things kind of happen because you're kind of painted yourself into a corner,
right?
And that
brings us back to what we were talking about, right? Yeah. Okay. So that brings us back to turning points in detours. I'm gonna go chronologically, but I might veer off.
Okay.
Very, very, very likely I'm going to veer off. But like, I mean, we mentioned like kind of how we got here to this place, you know, and it just the fact that we're back at this place is unbelievable.
And
you know,
weird and lovely.
It's weird and lovely, and it was like I remember walking in here after many years, and it was like there were just certain things that it smelled the same. Like it smells the same here than it did.
I know.
30 years ago.
Like baked in. Yeah,
it's baked into and like in the little kind of, what is it, like a little like electrical insulator thing that was like the door prop.
Yeah, the door prop. Yeah.
Yeah, that was here.
That was there.
That was like 40 years ago. They're still using the same thing to prop the door up.
Using the same thing.
Yeah, yeah. So there was like a lot of that kind of stuff that went on. Anyway, let's get into it. But like you know, like for me was like in the band's case, like the real first turning point was a little bit before you joined the band, you know, was because I remember we were here and we were recording, like we were recording songs in off hours. We were like in here, we had, and things were kind of weird at the studio, you know, but we were like recording at night and off time and coming in and kind of
weird in terms of like your relationship with the studio.
With the studio itself is like like I was kind of engineering, and there were like kind of like new people that were coming in, new people that were coming into the fold as far as like, you know, marketing people, other producers, and the owner, and it was like it started getting odd, and then
little sketch
got a little sketch, yeah. And but we were recording songs, and then basically what happened is, you know, we started. How dumb. I'm going to tell this story. Okay, we were dumb enough. We were dumb enough that we had, like, you know, a studio manager, and we had a studio, and so it just kind of started getting odd here, like, you know, like it was like a lot of money being spent, and we were like really loved the place. We loved this room, we loved this place, and there was a lot of money being spent, and things were starting to go downhill. So we kind of started having meetings, just kind of like saying, well, you know, what are we going to do? You know, how are we going to save this? You know, because like the powers that be, you know, the powers that be were in our eyes, which accurately, because the place actually did fail eventually.
Right.
Not very long.
Right.
You know, after, and we were kind of like going through the process of saying, well, you know, what can we do we love working here. What can we do to save it? Or what can we do to like keep things on the up and up when, you know, there was just a lot of just weird business going on and money being spent, and what you're aware of as well.
Right.
I mean, neither one of us were involved in any of that.
No,
because we were employees.
Right. In fact, it affected our, like, everybody's kind of like path. All you want to do is produce music. All you want to do is like write the songs, learn how to do it. And all the side things of the business or the perceived business, like, just get in the way, especially when somebody thinks there's like something there they could make money on. Right,
yeah. And that kind of was happening. So we started having meetings saying, okay, you know, we were the best we can, you know, with the boots on the ground, the soldiers, you know what I mean, the engineers and the studio manager, and that we're going to do what we can to keep this place solid. But, you know, being the idiots that we were, we had the meetings here. So
I finally know where this story is going.
So
I'm like, this is just general knowledge okay.
No. So we started having the meetings here, you know, which is, you know, like, I mean, if you're It's not, and then we never considered that we were having a meeting in a recording
that
studio.
you were trying to have planning meetings to get out of the shadow of the KGB, but you were doing them in the Kremlin.
Exactly.
That's what was happening.
So anyway, so basically,
That's like an overstatement, quite
yeah.
But I mean, you know.
So anyway, I didn't plan on going here today, which is pretty obvious. But
I kind of like it.
But anyhow, well, we're so we're having these meetings, and of course, we're doing this in the control room over there, and they're being recorded. So
How were they being recorded?
because they had ran wires through the. Basically, we were being watched, through the whole thing.
Say
This is long
you
before.
can say that you were being bugged.
We were being bugged. The room was bugged.
The room was bugged.
The room was bugged. Yeah, we didn't know
by the owner.
Yeah, and he would, so we'd have these meetings on how to kind of keep things on the up and up,
yes.
and but at the same time it was being bugged. So so then that didn't go well. So basically, we're out the door. You know what I mean? Not long after that, and then subsequently the business didn't do well for all that much longer.
Right on. Right on.
So, but that was maybe one of the dumber things that we've ever done in our lives.
Is actually like go into the layer
the
layer
KGB,
of the dragon.
Yeah.
Have
your meetings in the Kremlin.
Having meetings in the Kremlin.
Right.
And you thought this was perfectly fine.
We thought that was a great idea.
That's fine.
So anyhow, but that's not but as far as the turning point goes, so then basically we're out, and the big turning point for the Badleys anyway, to me, the beginning of the beginning, as far as what the band became was we were playing gigs, and then we had a couple of the guys knew Terry Selders, and I'll give Terry credit for this. And this is pre you actually.
This is before I even joined.
And this is you pre you, and we decided that
Terry.
Well, Terry, I'm losing my train of thought. But anyhow, Terry basically, we decided, well, wouldn't it be cool if Terry managed us?
Right on.
These guys knew he was in the music business. He was in New York. Well, he was in Jersey City, but working in Manhattan.
Yep.
And he was managing hip hop acts. And we said, man, we had a history, so we said, would you want to manage us? And he agreed to do it. And it was this is the stupidest thing, but it was he agreed to do it. And very soon after that, he said, okay, well, I booked you at Waterfront Studios in Hoboken in August. You're going in to record your first record.
Oh.
You know what I mean?
Terry literally just
went ahead
forward.
and booked the studio.
And you guys were like, oh, because we should maybe
we should get serious about this.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing with, the thing is just that whole situation of there's a word for it. It's Spartan something. But that whole thing of you go ahead and say, well, okay, well, this is what I'm going to do. You know what I mean? And you really have no idea how you're going to get there. You know what I mean? Or we didn't have a stable of songs or anything. We had some songs we had been recording. We had pieces of things. We had things that we didn't know. And but we didn't have a commitment. And I think that really was the first turning point for the band, was actually somebody just going ahead and saying, all right, you're making a record on this date.
Right on.
You know what I mean?
Right on.
And I think in music, the music, in the arts anyway, you're dealing a lot with the arts. You're dealing with things that are very subjective. If you open up a sandwich shop or a coffee shop or something like that, it's okay, either people come in and buy the stuff or they don't.
Yeah, and
you can't say, well, you can with music or the arts or anything. You can't say, well, the people didn't get it.
Right.
It was brilliant, but nobody got it.
Right.
There's a real meritocracy in small business where you actually have to physically produce something that somebody wants.
Right.
You know what I mean? Where music's a little bit different, because you can kind of say that everything was sound and nobody understood because of where you are, or a manager screwed it up, or somebody didn't promote it, or blah 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 blah.
Right, and there's kind of always somewhere to kind of, if things don't go well, there's always somewhere to kind of lay blame, and but you're talking about this first turn, probably the first major turn that then affected me, was about taking control.
Right.
and actually getting serious. And it's not just being serious. I mean, you're serious if you're a musician and you want to be better, but there's all the bits of how do we record something that is decent, that our heroes, to emulate our heroes, and to do that takes so many things.
Yeah.
And like you said at the time, like you actually had a studio. You could be in a studio, you could have a label, you could have a promoter, you can have all the things. But if they're not, somewhat going in the same direction, our little football team ended up being, going in the same direction where we could choose our destiny. And we did that getting ahead of it, doing that for 3 independent records. But that started with your process of doing the EP.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was like, Waterfront Studios, Hoboken. It was like Lenny Kravitz's place.
Yeah.
Where Lenny did Let Love Rule. And
I came to visit.
Yeah. I remember you were there.
Came to visit, and it was like this, if anybody knows Hoboken, New Jersey, it's right on the water, and it's a huge it was kind of like an empty office building, but in the first floor, I guess Lenny Kravitz owned this building in the first floor. But
Henry Hirsch,
Henry Hirsch. Okay, right. And all of Lenny's his 8-track Ampex recorder and his Trident board and all of his drums and all of his amps and everything were like in this room. It was really like magical to see.
Yeah,
and
like
you guys
Lisa Bonet was calling all the time.
Oh my God, yeah. So like I just visiting you guys. I was in New York, and I was starry-eyed at what you guys were trying to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and the reason it happened, but like what happened soon after that, after like, okay, the studio is booked, then it was like, there was kind of like that burn the boats moment, where it was like, because it was like, we had one guy in, Harrisburg, Lancaster sort of area. Mm-hmm. We had one, I think Ronnie was still living in New York. Mm-hmm. I was here. Mm-hmm. This is pre-you. Mm-hmm. So that when Pete was at Susquehanna. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Pete was still in college.
Yeah, well, yeah, almost. Yeah,
yeah.
Well, just getting out.
Yeah.
And so it was like there was that level of kind of like, okay, everybody move here.
Right.
Everybody move here. We're rehearsing every day.
Right.
And that's what we did. And that was it. That was the beginning, and I still think a lot of the work ethic probably from those 2 years, and you came in the middle of that. Mm-hmm. And what was probably, because you see a lot of, people have bands have rehearsals, and then like there's like 3 hours and 2 hours of it is screwing around.
Right.
And then they actually do a little bit of work, and like there's no way to quantify what the difference is between what a band that's actually trying to be a real group. Mm-hmm. There's no way to quantify that between that and somebody else just kind of
right on
going through the motions.
Right on.
And then it was a process from there. But that was the beginning. Just kind of like that. Burn the boats. We're going. Mm-hmm. Everybody's moving here. Mm-hmm. Everybody's going to do this every day. Mm-hmm. And whatever we got to do to survive in the meantime. Mm-hmm. Like I remember, like I had a gig at one point, like shoveling cat food. Mm-hmm. I worked at a Purina plant. Like Jeff worked on the railroad.
That's that's actually my favorite.
Yeah,
that Jeff working on the railroad.
Ronnie was a substitute teacher.
Yeah, Mr. S.
Pete was a waiter.
Yeah,
like we did all these things just to get going. But that was kind of like the beginning of, like basically we started to kind of gel to be like a real unit, and it got serious. And then it was like, then once we got in that swing, it was like, okay, record every 18 months. Mm-hmm. Every 18 months there's a record. Between that, there's going to be singles.
And in order to do that, it means playing a lot and saving money and booking a studio and writing songs and rehearsing and doing all the back timing for that, as any band member would know. Yeah. But it puts you on a timeline. It puts you on notice. But it was an organization, at least at that point. Yeah,
it puts you on notice. I mean, it's basically it's like, and along the way you're going to fail. Like with anything. I mean, anything in life. It's kind of like I like subscribe to the theory of like, if you want to succeed at something, you just increase your rate of failure. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? That's the way I see it. You know, it's kind of like, because you're not going to get it right. You're not going to get it right a whole bunch of times. And like just very, very few things over time are special. I mean, and that's just the way it is. I know everybody, you know, like when you're doing a project or you're doing something, you're creating something, you get excited about it. Always. I do. Everything I do, I get excited about when I'm doing it. But then afterwards, you're kind of like, only like this small, tiny percentage of it has any sort of
real spark or transcendence or connection.
Connection.
It's connection. Yeah.
Yeah, the connection is the word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
So I remember that was like that time. Back into that story was like we had lunch in when we were working in Sound City. We had lunch with Bruce Dickinson, the singer of Iron Maiden.
Jumping ahead, 3 independent records, record deal, recording the next record.
Same point.
And then you're like, and so Bruce tells us.
Yeah, Bruce tells us like, you know, like, yeah. I can't do the imitation of Bruce. But
I mean, boys, 90% of everything you do is shit.
Yeah, 90% of everything is garbage.
Yeah, I mean, Bruce, you know, having kind of an experience like that where you have a guy who kind of like achieved a whole lot, you know, is like Iron Maiden left the UK for like 8 years, recorded in the Caribbean, toured the States and the world, did not go back to the UK because of the tax situation. Yeah. This guy can fly a 747. He's type rated on 30 airplanes. Like I don't know that for a fact. I know that Bruce Dickinson's type rated on a 747. Anyway, this is a guy
who has a PhD, doesn't he? Like he's like this real Renaissance kind of guy.
Yeah, he's just.
I don't know that for a fact either.
But also I believe that when the same kind of thing. In fact, we were just talking with our friend Chris earlier about benevolent dictators. You know, Bruce Springsteen was not in the original Iron Maiden, but like
Bruce Dickinson. Bruce Springsteen wasn't either.
Bruce Springsteen was not in the original Iron Maiden. So Bruce Springsteen was never an Iron Maiden, is what you're telling me?
Not the original and not to this day.
Does he listen to Iron Maiden?
I'm sure.
Okay. So Dickinson goes, you know, I am so sorry. So Bruce Dickinson is like that kind of thing where you need a path,
right?
You know, that Mellencamp thing, Springsteen's thing. You know, you do need those things to, again, just put you on notice as a group, and even if you are a group.
Yeah.
And so we were like, you know, everybody's not lovely all the time, but at least in an organization, we agreed that this was at least something that was going to get us somewhere. You know?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and it was steady progress for a lot of time, a lot of years. Yeah. But I mean, that was the Bruce, like you say, the 90% of everything is shit. You know, that was, I found that kind of, I really loved that. Yeah. Like and then he said of that 10% is decent. And of that 1%, you know, 10% of that is actually what everybody likes. Yes. You know what I mean? So it's just like a matter of increasing your rate of failure.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's so Malcolm Gladwell.
Really?
Yeah.
Did I steal that?
Yeah. No. It's just that, you know, I mean, Gladwell's all about like the whole arc.
Yeah.
I mean, again, don't fact check me for God's sake.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Anyhow. Well, okay. So, you know, like moving backwards to what we were talking about, you know, I don't know where we were, but you know, like
that turning point where you guys got a manager, but that manager moved. Everybody moved to Northumberland.
Yeah, we moved to here. Yeah.
And everybody was.
What was it? Pete and Ronnie lived up the street here.
Right up the street, and then manager Terry was kind of like a member of the band.
Yeah.
And that was the reason you all, you know, because when you asked. You know, when you called me and said, "Hey, you want to try this out?" and blah 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 blah, we finally move out here. You know, the first person I really talked to about band logistics was Ronnie.
Yeah.
And Ron, the drummer, is like, he's like, well, you know, if you're not working a temp job on your day off, you can do mailings, you can do this, you can do that, you can do mailing list, you can do all these things.
Right.
And so like that actually put me on notice. I'm like, oh, this is serious.
Yeah.
We're not messing around.
But that's another story, you know, was you, I mean, when you came in and it was like, this is the lesson here, folks. The lesson here is.
What's our takeaway?
My takeaway from you entering the band was, if you love someone, you let them know.
You let them know.
You know what I mean? You don't know where it's going to go. You know what I mean? You don't know where it's going.
Yeah, and it might be bad.
It might be bad, but it might be good.
It's probably going to be bad, but it might be good.
It might be good, but
it ended up being good.
So in this case, for our listeners that don't know this story, basically our bass player left because if you're rehearsing every single day and playing gigs and making no money, there's there's some people out there that don't want to do that. You know what I mean? So, and he was a good guy, Rick. He's a great guy, great player. And he was a little bit older than us, and he just kind of like said, okay,
But it's kind of like a tough road. I mean, it's like something you have to do, or if you want to do it, it's like
right, yeah. So anyhow, Rick left, and we didn't have a bass player, and it was kind of like, like Spinal Tap, the hot seat was the drummer, and the Badleys it was the bass player, because we had. We had Steve, Jeff's brother, and that was a very like Liam and Noel Gallagher kind of situation. A lot of fighting went on.
If that had worked out in a different universe, that would have been perfect because it was. Yeah,
they had the dynamic.
Like
they had that brother thing.
Yeah,
well, Chris and
the Black
Chris Robinson,
Rich Robertson,
yeah. Rich would be like incredibly pissed that I hesitated to remember his name, which I know.
Let's shout out hashtag Rich Robinson. We're really sorry, man.
I love Rich Robinson.
Love the.
Anyhow,
I was literally just gonna say I love the County Crows.
All right, but anyhow,
and now canceled.
So three. So you're on like this is the third bass player coming in, and we need a bass player. So I get around to I call Paul. And I call you, and the premise of the call was, I know you're in New York, you're working at porn programs or whatever whatever it was called, and you're writing sex scenes and recording that. Yeah.
Well, I'm editing for Tempo.
Okay, all right.
Okay, I think that.
These are things.
These are things.
People don't think of this.
No, this is a production thing. Okay.
Yeah,
we're editing for Tempo.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Can story like there's always anyway. To your point.
Yeah. To my point, you got a job. You're working in the city. Bonnie's working in the city. In the city.
Yeah.
Right. She was working in the city.
Yeah, she was. Yeah.
Okay. So both of you, and you're working in the city, and we need a bass player. So I said, well, we're friends. We started here both together.
Yep.
So I call you up, and I remember the call, and I just said, look. You're going to say no to this. You're absolutely going to say no.
That was the first sentence.
Yeah, it was. I said, but, just so you know, right? Just so you know, we need a bass player, and if you want the gig, it's yours.
You're the first choice to come to Northumberland, Pennsylvania, and not have any job.
No job. You get
no promise.
We make no money.
We make no money.
And we make no money, and you have to like lick a lot of stamps and mail a lot of postcards and things like that, and play a lot of gigs for free.
Everybody in the band had like a private school education.
Oh yeah.
Except for Ron the drummer, quite frankly, and Terry.
Ron did. Ron, not private. Ron and Jeff went to Mansfield.
They went to Mansfield.
State school.
Yeah, it's a state school.
Yeah.
But you know what? In many ways, Ron learned so much from that.
Yes, he did. I'm going to bring him on here and ask him what he learned. What did you learn?
Paul said you learned a lot. That phone call was just if I could say that it wasn't a pivot. I didn't know how to pivot, but it was an idea like you have in your head that you like music so much. You love music so much. You just want to know how to do it. I didn't. You said, "Hey, I'll play bass. You can play guitar." I was a guitar player, but I was a guitar player that hadn't ever found like a real pocket, and it was like kind of heavy and like like super Marshall-y and super.
I forgot about that.
All that kind of stuff. And so I was just like, dude, I think that would kind of change I don't think that that's good for me. I'll learn to play the bass. Okay. And I'm like, how hard could it be? And so just last year in 2024, I really finally
figured out how to play bass.
Yeah, finally felt comfortable.
There's this great quote.
It's really difficult.
What the great quote? The guy Peter Benchley wrote Jaws, right? Great quote. He said, somewhere along in my career, I realized, I'm paraphrasing, but he said, somewhere along my career, I realized that I have absolutely no talent for writing. He said, but I was too famous to stop. You know what I mean? It's like I have too big of an audience.
Oh my word!
You know, he said, I realized I wasn't any good.
Yeah, you're learning the whole way. You're learning the whole way.
Yeah. And he said, but I had been too successful to stop actually doing the thing that I was average at.
That's amazing. We were not successful.
No,
at all.
No.
But yeah, we had a new team.
But your deal. I mean, your thing. I didn't expect you to say yes to that. I mean, first of all, you didn't have a bass. You need to have a bass. You didn't have a bass. You didn't have an amp. You didn't know how to play the bass.
Looking back, I think.
But you were my choice. You know.
Look, management styles vary person to person, and your style was like, let's hire the most unqualified individual, but could sit in a van for 6 weeks in a row.
It was more like that kind of like, what's that Moneyball movie? You know what I mean? Where he goes, he's like, you ever played first base? No, never have.
No.
You know what I mean? I mean, honestly, the whole thing was like, I knew you were a musician.
Yeah.
I knew you knew music. I knew you knew how to. I knew you understood ensemble playing and recording and all that. So, I think probably, I'm not a drummer, but if you gave me the gig and I absolutely had to learn the gig,
right on.
That's something, whereas somebody that doesn't understand all that, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, it's kind of a matter of like throwing yourself into the pool and just it's obviously the metaphor of it's a widely known metaphor, but it's the intention of like having to do something, I think.
Right.
Of that kind of thing. Like you want to survive or learn from it. And you don't know what you don't know. And that's the best thing. Cause like, I didn't know what I didn't know. I'm like, how hard could it be? Let's play the bass.
Right.
And, it's hard. It's hard to do that with songs. And like, Roberta Flack died yesterday. And, I just listened to Killing Me Softly, and Ron Carter plays the bass on that. And Ron Carter, when I was in college, I got to record Ron Carter at for a Christmas nativity 3 times in New York, only because my professor, took us up there to do that. And you listen back to it, and this is like our kind of like production desire to know how things are pulled together and make something great. Great song, but Roberta Flack got a arrangement production on that because of all the vocals, and she played electric piano on there.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know.
Yeah, she was a monster, a player and performer. But Ron Carter is this amazing jazz guy, and he was just playing the hi-hat, but dum, right with the hi-hat and everything.
Right.
And man, you don't think about those beautiful things when you're first starting out, and it's all this energy. And when I joined you guys, all I knew was that I was making a big life pivot or whatever again. And but yeah, enough of my yapping.
No, that's cool. I mean, I think that it's all about the choice. When you're making records or anything like that, it's like, I think people get too hung up on the chops of making a record, whether it be chops on the recording side or the chops on the playing side. And it's really more about the choice. I think that certainly there's people out there that you would consider wildly successful musicians that aren't that good technically or very sort of
in the camp
average
players. Yeah.
You know what I mean? But in my way of looking at it, I don't think those people are average.
Right.
You know what I mean? Maybe they are by the normal metric. I mean, I have guys that can play. I've done records with people that could play so fast and they could just do that, but they couldn't actually lay down. They couldn't play a rhythm part in time, in tune. I've had an experience where I was doing a pop track once and I was recording a quartet, like a string quartet. And I brought the charts in, and it was all kind of whole notes and half notes and these little tiny parts. And I gave the charts to the group, and they laughed at me.
They're looking at whole notes and half notes and all these sustained things.
Yeah, and all these, and like this was like so elementary. This was like elementary school, level.
They're
but like on a pop track, you got to put that in time. You got to put it in tune. You got to play with a tempo reference,
and you got to follow the vocal, and you got to
call the vocal.
You're not just
tuning, timing, and tone.
Yeah.
3 T's.
There are 3 T's. It's tuning, timing, and tone.
Yeah. So like anyhow. So, but you got to do those things, and you can't just, it's not a matter of like like a big hall or something. You're playing like a concert. It's so forgiving.
It is forgiving, and it's just a different conversation.
Yeah.
And a pop track is difficult.
Yeah. It's
not
difficult.
That it's not
it's difficult in a different way.
In a very different way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like that's, I think, like as a musician, if you're like, you're like, for us, like, we're getting here and we're rehearsing every day. We're trying to do this thing, and you're trying to find this sound. And it's not like it's, you're trying to find this thing of like kind of trying to find yourself and finding where your groove is and finding what works. And I don't really know if there's any other way to do that other than reps.
Yep. Especially for us that are, in the camp of like not, nobody's Yngwie Malmsteen John McLaughlin or Jeff Beck. Why did I say Yngwie first? You know why? Because back in my head, that's what I was kind of doing in the 80s.
Sure, like learn how to
I'm like, yeah, but like, nobody's Jeff Beck in the band.
Right.
But we definitely have songs. And by we, I mean you.
but like I think that, and you hate to talk about it in music, in business terms, but I think that's a difference. Like you can sit there and you can say, like, if you're like a local cover band or you're a tribute band or you're whatever, and there's a certain amount of like sort of carpentry and chops, but carpentry to like building that thing up to play it live, and you're using a reference that's already been created. You know what I mean? By somebody. Creating that out of thin air, as simple as it is, as simple as John Fogerty is.
It's very...
You know what I mean? It just doesn't happen.
Right.
Right. And I did a session once with this guy. His name was Bob Malone. And he was the B3, he was the keyboard player for Fogerty. And I did a session, and after it was like a live recording with an audience, So after we did the session, he was talking to fans and audience members and to people that were coming in, and a guy walked up to him and said, after he did the show, because he's doing his own music at the show, and he's like all over the place. I mean, he's like an amazing player,
right?
And a guy came up to him and said, basically this guy said, well, you must be bored stiff playing with John Fogerty, He said, because like I'm listening to you play and like there's nothing, you can't do any of that stuff, And Bob stops him right away, and he's like, no, he said playing with John doesn't require amazing chops. He said, but it requires impeccable taste.
Right on.
You know what I mean? And he said, and that's why I got hired.
Right on.
So they don't feel below themselves to do what's required or to like lay that thing in there. And it's like, if you look at it, like I was saying, in business terms, like if you have a brand or something and you're trying to put something out there, what do you want? You want to like own a word or own some sort of thought in somebody's mind, Like, people say
Kleenex.
That's the one we've talked about before. You have Kleenex, and it's like Kleenex is a company, that's a brand, but everybody thinks tissues, right? Because they own that word.
Yeah, if you ever, like let's just say boomer talk about like a 70s band, they're like, what kind of music like? Well, I like Lynyrd Skynyrd music. Like that, and that's a Kleenex kind of thing. Or it. I don't know why boomers are loving Lynyrd Skynyrd. I'm just throwing it out there like that. That thing is everybody kind of
Yeah. So that's it, and it's like that's the thing with with being in a band forever is like, you know, like if you hear 5 seconds of a Stone song, you know, there's kind of like, you got Keith Richards with that open tuning and the bottom strings off, and it has this sound, and like an average person has no idea how he does that. They don't know what a Telecaster is.
But communication has taken place.
Communication has taken place, and there's like a vibe there, and those guys own that. Are they the greatest musicians in the world? No. But like they own that sound. They own that little piece. You know what I mean? And that's the supreme act of any band, you know, to have that sort of, you know, to own that thing. And that doesn't have anything to do with, and people that have great chops but don't own something like that.
Yeah.
Have a little bit skewed perspective on
or you get
how hard that is. Really hard.
Yes.
Really, really hard to be Billy Joe Armstrong.
Yes, it's exactly.
You know what I mean?
I love that example.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like really, really hard to get something that focused together.
Yeah, yep.
And you know, and I'm a fan, you know, so I know you are as well. So it's like, yeah, I mean, these are the things that, these are the things that we've spent 35 years doing.
Yeah.
Right on.
And in a weird way, they'll always kind of, I guess because of the culture of that, they'll always push you in the direction that you are going to eventually take, because you have that crazy gene of like, I really want to understand it and own it and learn and, you know, and be cool and be good. And, you know,
there you go.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Episode 1.
This podcast was produced by Stone State Entertainment.